Hello and welcome back to A Splash of Paint. Now it's time for me to share a few more of my own simple tips and handy hints to help you discover the wonders of watercolour in part one of today's Try Your Hand At project. Let's take a closer look at how to paint a wild flower scene with a little butterfly sat on the top of a scabious flower. The first thing I want to do is paint a nice background, a nice wet into wet background. So I've got a large size 20 brush there, and I'm just going to mix up a few natural background colours. First of all, some burnt sienna, and I want to mix this with some natural blue, or you could use an ultramarine or a cobalt blue for this. It will darken the burnt sienna. It'll give us a nice kind of neutral colour for the background. I'm also going to get some natural grey in there as well, and I'll mix that with burnt sienna as well, because that will give me a slightly darker shade of the first colour. And then we'll probably go for some natural yellow, which is a sandy colour. And that should do us for the background at this particular stage. I've got a big brush, nice and clean. I'm going to wet the paper larger than the area, because I want this to be a vignette, which is like a soft faded edge. So I don't want to go all the way to the edge of the paper for this one. But I want to do quite a bit of work while it's wet. So I'll make sure, looking down the edge, it's all nicely covered. And that should give us good time to do all the work we need to do. And I'll basically keep doing as much as I can until the point of it drying. So I'll go with an extra dose of water. There we go. It's like watching paint dry this. So that's pretty much all there. That's all covered. And then I'm going to use the colours in the order that I mixed them, really. So the brownie colour, I'm just going to sweep it across, basically. This will just take the white away. Leave these little bits. This is what watercolour is. Let it run, let it just become part of the background. And just sweep it through. And just let it all work in. Let's go for the darker colour. Just bring a bit of that in there. And let's go for the natural yellow colour. And literally just letting it all work through. I made the natural yellow slightly darker there. Or slightly deeper. There we go. And I'll just let that do its own thing. Just let it all fade away at the edges. The next thing I want to do is I want to put some grasses in this. So using a rigger brush, which is a long skinny one, I'm going to mix myself a thicker consistency of burnt sienna and natural grey. I'm going to pop a little bit of the natural yellow in there just to make it look a little bit more of a sort of grassy, sort of ryegrass kind of colour. Not a massive amount of paint on the brush, because I want to control the flow, and I'm just going to go in and just let this thing just all fade and just become part of the background. Of course, if it's out of focus, it's going to soften on the edges, and the less paint you have on the brush, the more of a soft effect you're going to get. There we go. So just let it all just become part of the background there. Don't worry about what you're painting over. It doesn't matter. Just let it all just become out of focus. It's nice at the bottom just to give it a bit of a smudge, let it all fade away. So I've still got that little amount of paint on the brush, just to give me the effect I'm looking for. There we go. Okay. Now, with the size 6 brush, I want to paint a bit of an out of focus flower just to this side. So these are like a purple, violet, scabious, which is like a wild version of the flower. So we're going to go for the intense violet, which I want to mix with a little bit of blue just to make it crisper, and literally have a tiny amount of paint on my brush, so take most of it off on tissue. And I've made a very weak sketch of this, and I want this to be out of focus, so I'm just going to paint it in. So less paint will control the flow of the actual paint on the wet paper. So that's why I keep dabbing it on the brush on the kitchen roll first. There we go. So that's the flower there. And I'm going to mix up a very strong green. And this is going to be lemon yellow with some natural blue. Very, very crisp. Quite dark, so add a little bit more blue than you normally do. Even creep in a tiny bit of alizarin crimson, that will darken it even more. There we go. Again, a little bit of paint on the brush to control the flow. And I'm just going to add the out of focus impression of the leaves that sit underneath the flower as the bud actually burst open. And then we're going to come down the stem of the flower, very, very dry brush. If you choose the right paper, it will stay wet for quite some time. I mean, I've been working for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe longer, and it's still damp enough to work with. And that's because it's a good cotton-based paper. That's the secret to this. So that's just going to come down, and it's just going to lightly fade away. So I'll dry the brush completely off and just use that brush just to make it all soften out on these areas. There we go. Okay, and at the same time as doing this, I'll use the rigger with the green, very dry. Just going to add little bits of green grasses. So just basically random flicks. Again, the paper's still damp. It's at the point of almost being dry, so it's a good time to do this kind of work. Just put a few little random spots and things. Any colour, even the brown. Just give it a bit of a stipple. Random taps and dabs and dobs and that sort of thing. There we go. Just going to get a bit of natural grey by itself. And over the top of the flower head, just going to put the little black spots that you get on the scabious. And then just even work that into the shape of the downward petals as they drop. There we go. Okie dokie. Now what I'll do next is I'll use the size 6 brush because the paper is 90% dry, so it's a good time to get these leaves at the bottom there. And I want to paint these in, starting off by putting the central line. Get a bit of water to freshen things up a little bit. And the leaves of the scabious flower are quite spiky. They remind me of a bit of a fern kind of shape. So we're just going to work these through, working out from that central spine. Put a few spots and things at the end, and then I'll do the other side, which will mean just slightly turning the board on the side. So just let it all flick away, put a few random dots to make it look more rustic and more natural. And then there's another one of these comes through. This one comes up this area. Again, just work from the central spine. Put the dots and things at the end. To the opposite side. Put a few dots and spots at the end there again. Turn it back over. Use a damp brush, wipe it on tissue, get the excess off, and then just use this damp brush, that little bit of water just to go in and just to soften all these areas in so they kind of blend into the picture, blend into this soft light effect that we're creating. If we had some grey to the green, making it really dark, and you could actually create a little bit of separation where the two leaves connect to each other. Dry brush, soften them away. So you can see where the two leaves actually open through there. Okay, so using a rigger brush, I want to use the brown that we did for the background. Not so much paint on the brush again, and then painting some grass now the paper's dry. So this is going to work its way from this area. This is like a tall kind of seeded grass, which is coming to the end of its time. I'm just going to work these through. Then I'll put some heads on the top of these, almost like a tree branch in a way. I'm just going to turn the board on the side again. And just get a few flicks to represent all the random grasses. A little bit of water, fade the bottom part of it away. And even soften one side of the grass just to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. A little bit more realistic. There we go. And then using the size 6 brush again in the same colour, I'm just going to put little heads on the top of this. And you sort of do it like a spiky outline. Just want a few of these, not too many. And clean brush, use the natural yellow, what you did on the background, and then pull that in to the centre there. And get the water on the brush, wipe it on tissue, and just finish that off by connecting, because the background colours fit in just nice with that area there. I've got a lighter colour just to add a couple more of those. Just a few random spots and dabs, even a little bit of dry brush, which is using the side of the brush as opposed to the tip, but very dry. And that just adds a nice bit of texture to the general area. And then when we come back for part 2, we'll paint in the nice close-up detail flower and put a butterfly set on the top. Why not have a go yourself? Remember, the most important thing is to have fun, and remember, we're always keen to see how you get on. So why not upload examples of your work on the community section of the SAA website. Visit saa.co.uk for details. Right, folks, time for a little break now, but join us in part 3 for the concluding part of today's watercolour project. We'll see you after the break.